So, could I have the first question, please? Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Jim Finn, and I'd just like to know how will leaving the EU affect the savings protection threshold?
My understanding is that it wouldn't affect it at all, because I would expect that the UK will continue to have rules that are consistent with the rules that will apply across Europe. Of course, the level, and I'm going to ask Robin to comment on this in a moment, but the level has changed in recent years, largely because of the exchange rate, and that is something, I think it's reviewed every 5 years from memory. But Robin, is there anything you would add?
I think if anything, it'll make it more stable. So the key thing to remember is that the European scheme sets the level, and that's bounced up and down a bit because of exchange rates. The actual funding for it is entirely UK based. So if you take the FSCS, what happens is that all the other institutions basically fund whatever recovery is put in place. You don't get any money in from European, so it's no less secure from leaving the EU position. All that will happen is that the limit will be, whether it settles out at 75 or 80 or 8, it will settle at one position and it won't get impacted by exchange rates. So yes, it might move as the exchange rates finally settle, but then it will be a little bit more stable, I think.
Martin Williams, several years ago you had a link with Legal & General, and I took advantage of that and I saw a financial advisor. That link has now disappeared. Is there any plans to reintroduce it with another firm like that?
Mike, I know this is a subject you've been thinking about very hard.
Yes, it is. Well, it's very sad that the link with the L&G broke down, and as you know, Legal & General pulled out of the service they were providing across the whole sector. So it wasn't our decision, unfortunately, for Legal & General to pull out. It was their own decision. And the reason they did that, unfortunately, was because they couldn't make enough money through that business. And under the new regulations that came in, something called the Retail Distribution Review, or RDR, that affected the way that investment products could be sold and the way that they were remunerated, they had to make at least a break-even position from the business they had with the building societies, and as far as I know, they struggled with that. So unfortunately, that's why they withdrew from the market. In terms of what we're looking at, that fundamental economic problem, it still exists if anyone else wants to come and work with us. But there are a number of things. You might have heard of robo-advice and things like that, which are starting to come in across the market that we're seeing, which we're keeping a close eye on. So for the time being, we don't think there's a way that we can do this cost effectively, but there are things that we're keeping a close eye on that might change in the future, and if they do, of course, we'd like to find ways to bring that service back, because I know for a number of members it was something that they got a lot of value from. So we'll do what we can, but we are to a certain extent reliant on what other models appear in the market and whether any of them would work in a face-to-face context like the one we had with L&G.
How would you compare your rates in general to other building societies like Nationwide, Virgin Money, etc.? And the second point is that when branches have closed down, and I'm not saying they shouldn't have had to close down, but when they have, what has happened to the staff in those branches? Have they been redeployed or offered redeployment, or unfortunately have they been made redundant?
In terms of how our rates compare to other societies, it depends when. So all of us will be in and out of the top of the tables at different points in time, depending on how much money we want at a point in time. So as you go through the year, it's not a steady, you know, if you're in the Best Buy tables all the time, that's when you get flooded with money that you then can't do things with. So we all end up sort of dropping in and out like this. We think our rates compare well on average over the year. Some societies will publish a slightly higher number than us, but that's more to do with the mix of products that they do. So if they do more fixed rate products, those are inevitably slightly higher rates. So on average, their average rate will be a bit higher. But we think overall we are competitive. back end of last year we weren't in the market as much because we'd taken in a lot of money and we didn't need any more. At the moment, that's not the case. We're going out there with some good products.
Okay, Mike.
And thank you. Just on that interest rate point, as a bit answer, the number that we had in the presentation here that showed the 0.38%, that basically is the average rate that our Yorkshire Building Society members receive across their savings balances that they hold across the whole group, relative to what the UK savings market as a whole pays. So as you can see, being a member of Yorkshire Building Society, you'll be 0.4% better off than average. And compared to other building societies, there is some separate data that I saw a couple of weeks ago that looked at the gap at the building societies relative to the banks, and there was a gap. Building societies pay more than banks, 0.4%. So again, some building societies like ours, we pay more. So that's over the long term what you'll get as a member. So I do hope you join us. To your question about staff and redundancies, I mean, no business likes closing branches, and we think long and hard before we consider that that's the right thing to do, and we look for lots of other options. But in some cases, it does become just frankly a harsh commercial reality that that's what we have to do. And those people that work in those branches, our focus then turns to them and to the members, obviously, who are served by that local branch too. And what we want to do is we want to find ways that we can redeploy those people if we can. I mean, it depends to some extent, where the branches are. So we've recently announced some branch closures, a number of which are actually in small towns around Huddersfield, for example. And a number of colleagues who have been displaced as part of that process have managed to find roles either in other local branches or in our head office in Bradford. So what we do is we make sure that any roles that are available across the rest of the group, the people who've been made but put at risk, they get first priority over all of those roles where they're suitable for them. And we also support them, if that isn't the case, we support them without placement. So we actually help them with their skills, and we help them find alternative roles elsewhere. And in the case of the changes at Norwich and Peterborough at the moment that I mentioned earlier on, we're also working with other large local employers in the Peterborough area who we know are recruiting, so that we can make sure that our colleagues are aware of where those jobs might be in the local area. So if we can't keep them, we do what we can to support them. So hopefully that gives you an idea.
And the one bit I'd add on to that is, I mean, in making those decisions, we do all the thinking and analysis you might think about beforehand to make sure we're doing the right thing. But critically, we do not then stint on what it costs to actually do the closures. So it's not, I don't sit there as finance director trying to squeeze the amount like that and say we've got to do this as cheaply as possible, because that's just the wrong thing to do.
I would like to know how much it costs Yorkshire Building Society, the fee for the auditors, and also under the item liabilities regarding derivative financial instruments. If you could explain that item, please.
Robin, one for you, I think. That's okay.
I knew that one was coming my way.
Yeah.
In terms of the auditors' fees, off the top of my head, I can't remember. It is around about $500,000, including other pieces that they do for us. We do a competitive review on that. We challenge that every year. I'm happy, looking across the sector, that is a sensible price to pay for what they do. We also have very strict rules in place in terms of what work they can do for us outside of the audit, because one of the key things you need to do is make sure your auditors aren't then going and doing bits of work elsewhere in the business. They have done a little bit of that for us in 2016, but within the rules and always in areas where them being the auditor actually helps them do that piece of work. So hopefully that answers on the auditors. The derivatives question, so we have fixed rate mortgages and we have fixed rate savings accounts, and what we do in order to manage the risk that gives us, so if you have a fixed rate product and every other interest rate moves, you can actually you can lose money if you get that wrong. So we take out a derivative, a deal with a bank that swaps that into a variable rate. So everything that we've got, we either sort of match off things that are on a fixed rate against each other, so that you know what income you're going to make on both sides, or you do these deals that turn it all into a variable rate, and therefore if interest rates move, your income and your expense moves in the same way, and you don't end up suddenly making no profit. The number that you see on the balance sheet, and there's one on the asset side as well, is you have to value those at each year end. So you have to value those contracts, because in theory, if interest rates do move, then they become more or less valuable. You'll see that both sides of the number tend to move pretty much in parallel, and we hold those instruments until the end anyway. So because we don't trade in those things, it's more of an accounting activity than anything else.
It was in the paper last month that says you're better putting your savings into premium bonds. What's your comments on that?
Well, I guess it depends how lucky you are, doesn't it? It's not. I mean, the rates on premium bonds go up and down as well, as you know, and the national savings NS&I. The rates on premium bonds do go up and down. Historically, the rates on premium bonds have been generally lower than the rates on savings. That does vary from time to time. And as I say, clearly you're taking a punt on a premium bond and you're not taking a punt on a savings account. So it's entirely up to you whether you fancy a flutter or not. I guess the fact that all of you are here, not down the road at the races, probably says something about attitude to risk as well.
I think part of that article as well was driven by the fact that in the budget they announced a bigger target for NS&I. So last year it was 9 billion. This year they've said they want to raise 12 billion. But a bit like however long ago now when the pensioner bond came out, the way they will do that almost certainly is you'll see a spike. There'll be a product there for a while, but then it will disappear very quickly because they will tend to. So if you're, again, it's back to this point of if you're after, long term, it's there, good product, that's not necessarily where you want to go.
Are there any plans for branch closures in the Liverpool area?
It's something that we keep continually under review, just as any business always keeps every area of its operation continually under review, but we've got no plans.
Paul Sefton,
Yes.
I'm just worried that as a mutual society, the more branches you close down, and the UK was about 40 branches, you're less of a mutual society, really. And you're giving the wrong impression. Certainly if you're closing the N&P branch, people in the East Anglia, Cambridge area must be thinking you're less of a mutual. Or is it counterproductive? Because I see that one of your statistics there is 87% of people are within a 30-minute drive of a branch. That's not a mutual branch. The fact you've actually got only a quarter of people going into branches, you should be encouraging more people.
I would, as chairman of the board of the society, I would completely endorse the points that Mike was making during his presentation about our complete commitment to branches and our ability to connect with our members and customers on a face-to-face basis. And that's the first and most important thing that I can say. And we will, as an organisation, continue to invest in our branch network. And you have my word for that. It is also important to recognise that we are the custodians of your money. And it is vitally important that we maintain a sustainable, long-living organisation. And people's habits are changing, and there's no getting away from it. So, if you like, for any branch that has been identified for closure as a result of the exercise we've just conducted, they will have a footfall of less than 7 people a day. And the simple reality of life is that people are not using branches in the way that they used to do. It is our responsibility to make sure that not only do we recognise that, but we use the money, as Mike was explaining, to invest in the future, and that is in order to enable us to compete in the digital world that we are facing. And it's something that we have to face. Mike, I don't know if there's...
Well, thank you. And the only other thing to add is we have been opening our agency network, more agency partners in a number of geographies over the past few years, and we do remain committed to that programme as well. So we've opened 20 or 30 in the last 3 or 4 years, and these tend to be agencies right in local communities, which is exactly what you just described actually in terms of what the service is that we then provide in those areas. It's more cost effective for us to do that with a local agency than it is with a new branch, because there's fixed cost associated with a branch that a local agency doesn't have to bear, and that's why that model works in a different way for us. But I
Just
completely
query
agree.
what do you mean by local agencies? I can understand if you're doing something like the police do, like pop-up shops, that'd be a great idea.
Yeah.
And do them in supermarkets, etc.
Yeah, well, that's so. What these local agencies are, we tend to work with local businesses. So we might work with an independent financial advisor, we might work with a local estate agent, and what they'll do is they'll cordon off a part of their shop, which will be branded and look exactly like a Yorkshire Building Society branch, and outside it'll say Yorkshire Building Society with a sign outside, and the person in there will be wearing a YBS uniform, and will offer the same products that you'll be able to get in a branch. So it looks very much like a branch, but it's actually owned by that local business and run on their behalf with our products, and those customers become members of the society.
And if I may, to that point, I will ask one of the questions that we have been given, which is how would an adult set up a bank account and trust for a child? Because I think that is how a lot of people begin their savings lives, that a grandparent will take them along to a branch.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. So if you'd like to, you can set up an account for your, as I say, your children or grandchildren or nephews or nieces or whatever it is you'd like to do. If you're an existing member, then all you need to do is come into a branch with a birth certificate or a passport for the child that you'd like to open the account for, and we can do that for you.
This isn't a question, it's actually a statement bearing up what you're saying. I've got 2 grandchildren, and I've had them in the YBS from when they were born. So one is 18 at the end of the year, and I'll give him his passbook so he knows where he can go into, although he has an online account with somebody else. But he knows that grandma has that book, and I will be encouraging him to carry on with it. So it is for younger people too.
That's brilliant. And
Yep.
the great news for that 18-year-old is they'll also be able to access that money online if they want to, so they can look at it online, or they can use the passbooks entirely up to them. Yeah.
I wonder, because you're in such good financial shape, whether you're at risk of any predator takeover.
Well,
whether you've ever been approached.
I think that because of the particular business model that we represent, namely, we are owned by the membership, not by shareholders, not by people who could get together and decide that they wanted a different owner. There is absolutely no risk whatsoever of a predator as far as we're concerned. And furthermore, I would say that we have absolutely no intention whatsoever of joining forces with any other organisation in the very foreseeable future.
And we don't plan to demutualise either.
Indeed we do not. I mean, there was a period of time, as everybody will recall, when there was a huge amount of demutualisation, but that wave ended some considerable time ago, and it's certainly not at all part of the board's thinking.
And not one of those demutualised building societies is still an independent business. They've all been swallowed up by others. Yeah.
One more from here, and then we'll wrap it up, I think.
Were these submitted in advance, John? Is that what these were?
They were submitted in advance. So, is it still worth taking out an ISA?
Oh, that's a good question.
Bit close to the wire today, but yeah.
Shall I have a go at that?
Go on.
Well, it is a very good question, because obviously, as we all know, the fact that now everyone has a personal allowance on interest, with interest rates so very low at the moment, you've got to wonder whether it is worth putting your money into an ISA rather than a normal savings account. Now, the challenge you have is you never quite know what one chancellor to the next is going to do. For some customers, it might not make any difference whether they have their money in an ISA or whether they don't. My personal view is it's always worth, if you can, using your ISA allowance first, because you typically get similar rate, maybe even slightly higher rate sometimes on ISAs versus non-ISAs, and you have the option then of that tax wrapper, and you never know when the Chancellor might come looking for that interest in the future, and that way you can keep it to yourself. But it's up to you, obviously.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that brings us to the end of the question and answer session. And on behalf of my colleagues here, can I just thank you not only for turning up, but also for asking some pretty penetrating questions, which we will take full notice of.